slip on Wednesday.
Budget cuts.
That is the first in a wave of public service sector cuts coming as the federal government tries to return its books to balance. But there will be job cuts in all departments. You've got 1,100 at National Defence, 840 cuts at Health Canada, 650 positions cut here at the CBC, and the list will get a lot longer over the coming weeks. But one area that was really targeted, the environment and science and research. Whether it's fast-tracking big projects like the controversial Northern Gateway Pipeline or killing an environmental panel created under the Mulroney government, the question is, how will Budget 2012 change Canada's environmental and scientific research landscape? Joining me to discuss this, Elizabeth May. She's the leader of the Green Party of Canada, and Gary Corbett. He's the president of the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada, one of Canada's biggest unions that represents scientists and researchers. Both of you, good morning, and welcome to the House.
Thanks, Evan. Good to be here.
Elizabeth May, let me start with you because you called Budget 2012 the worst budget in the history of Canada. Why did you use that term?
Well, I tried to go back to figure out when I'd seen a budget this bad. Now, obviously, I haven't been alive for the entire history of Canada, but I could not imagine a time when any government in our history had faced anything like the threat of the climate crisis and chosen in a budget not only to ignore all the science it's receiving, but to put new money and lots of it in and destroy in laws that are standing in the way, put everything on the table to boost fossil fuel production all over the country. So in the context, I figured, in the Second World War, would the government of Canada have put forward a budget that didn't mention that we faced that challenge? This is the kind of challenge that previous governments have made centerpieces of budgets, and this budget doesn't mention climate change at all.
Just give me some examples in here of cuts, since we're talking about the effect of cuts, that lead you to a pretty strong statement.
What they're saying in the budget, which is also based on forced and frankly fictitious recommendations from the Environment Committee. I say fictitious because they pulled the plug on hearings this fall and came up with a report in the absence of evidence. It's all driven by PMO. It's all about making it as easy as possible for Enbridge to build a massive 1,200-kilometer pipeline from Alberta to Kitimat to run very risky oil supertankers on the BC coastline. To do that, they've said in this budget that they will be streamlining, steamrolling the environmental assessment process by limiting the amount of time hearings can take, and also by wherever possible turning them over to the provinces altogether. And on top of that, there's no money in this budget to restore the eco-energy program. There's no money in this budget to save the Polar Environmental Atmospheric Research Lab at Eureka. There's no money for science in the climate change area. Nothing at all to, for anyone looking to restore our reputation in the world by having a climate action plan. And at the same time, threatening environmental groups, spending new money, $8 million, so that CRA has more money with which to harass charities that are doing conservation work.
All right, there's lots in there. We'll pick it up. I want to get Gary Corbett. 400 of your members received pink slips this week. People keep hearing these numbers, and in a sense they're general numbers. Give us a specific sense. Where are these cuts hitting? Who are they hitting?
So we started by having 400, and those were pre-budget numbers left over from strategic operating. But since that, and every day, today and yesterday, we're receiving more and more of these cuts, notices. The letters are coming. We're up to over 1,100 now. It's happening very fast.
1,100?
1,100, yeah, just for PIPs. There's also other bargaining aids, so it's far more than that. But let me get more to your question about specifics. We've gone, and this is all being very difficult to pull together very quickly, but we're doing our best. We see a lot of scientific positions. We see a lot of biologist positions. We see a lot of physical science positions, research scientists in these letters. Now, while these are affected, and they're not surplus yet, and that's a complication, they're still targeted. So we're still evaluating where these will go. If you're cutting your scientific infrastructure for the country, if you're really not doing a service to the long-range viability or sustainability.
Can you give us specifics? I mean, people wonder what's being cut. I mean, we've heard about what kind of scientists, what kind of research will is actually being cut here?
Well, pre-budget, we've had, and I won't mention the name, we've had a scientist who is eminently known around the world, works in water quality, and related to climate change. The program was cut last year. We're talking, and the Professional Institute has been copied on letters sent to the Deputy Minister of Environment, says, what are you doing, for God's name, what are you doing cutting this particular job? This particular person is eminently known around the world for what they bring to the table in terms of what's going to happen to this planet in the coming years.
So what's the cost of this? When you hear stories like this kind of scientist or this kind of assessment being cut, what's the overall cost of this? I mean, clearly the government's saying we've got to deal with some cost cutting, and we've made, there's a process here, right? The department's made selections as to what was the best way to do it. They were asked to say, give us 10% cuts, and that's how it was. So they'll say the process works.
That may be what they say the process works. That's not how anything works in Ottawa anymore. All of this is driven by the Prime Minister's office in terms of Stephen Harper's personal priorities. He does not want to hear about climate change. That's why the National Roundtable is killed. He doesn't want to hear about ozone science. That's why they've shut down the Pearl Research Station, which is the highest, closest to the North Pole research station of any government on the planet, and to let that go after we've invested $10 million.
Harper? I mean, I think it's very important because the departments have to make the cuts and the recommendations themselves. Then they submit it to Treasury Board.
You believe that fiction to this point? I can't believe that anymore. Not from what we see happening on the ground. The ministers don't know what's going on in their departments. I speak to them. This is driven out of PMO. It's the Prime Minister's pro-fossil fuel agenda. He doesn't want science. He doesn't want to hear from the roundtable. They gag the scientists so they can't speak to the media. And we see in the House, Peter Kent's already defended that they plan to so-called streamline ozone science. The handwriting's on the wall that what this is going to cost us is our ability to navigate the 21st century.
Departments were, from our point of view, departments were asked to submit proposals. I would assume that departments be working in their best interest of what their mandates are. They presented the proposal. It was a third party who helped this particular government identify which proposals, and I would say that the government, in what you had said, Elizabeth, has a choice in the types of proposals that are accepted and the types of proposals that are not. And it certainly doesn't appear that they're environmentally friendly.
What will we see in the coming weeks? What do you expect to see? Again, to remind our listeners, what happens here is there's a series of unfolding. There's the big number cuts, and then people will start individually finding out where they fall, and that's when we see the true shape of how this budget really unfolds. Right. So it unfolds a bit over time. What are you expecting to see?
Well, we're expecting to see more letters and more cuts, more identification of where the government is going to cut, and we're doing an analysis of that. So right now it appears that there are scientific positions being cut, much same as in the past. There are more professional type of positions being cut, those would link industry to government. We're not quite sure what that means just yet. And so as we're only days into this new budget, so as this rolls out, we'll be able to present that and make arguments.
Elizabeth, the government will say, let's talk about the fast tracking of big projects. Mm-hmm. One of the big examples, of course, is the Northern Gateway Pipeline. They say, look, don't mistake a 4-year period for being more effective than a 2-year period. They say it will be more effective and it will be quicker, but it will not undermine the environmental assessment process at all. What's your take on that?
Well, I think you have to look at the reality and the track record. They used when they were in minority government, they used the 2010 Budget Implementation Act to really gut a lot of the Environmental Assessment Act. And frankly, what they did was they said, look, all energy projects are no longer under the primary jurisdiction of the Environmental Assessment Agency. The NEB now has it. So the effect of that was not to speed things up. It was to undermine the environmental content of reviews. Then they cut the budget of the Environmental Assessment Agency a few years ago by 40%. So if you're looking for intention here, it's clearly not to give us a better environmental assessment process. What they're threatening here is not just the time limits. That's less my worry. My worry is much more around their notion that the Minister of Environment will have a discretion to decide whether there's an equivalent process going on provincially. This is about the withdrawal of the federal government from environmental review.
Gary, in the minute we have left here, what will the impact be of these cuts in your mind?
Well, I think in the long term, it's about the sustainability of things like the environment and the ability of the government to act as a protector of the environment for future generations of Canadians.
It's the kind of cuts, when Mike Harris made cuts in required water quality testing, the result was Walkerton. It's hard to anticipate when you see a government cutting deep into science and environmental protection where you see your first disaster. But this is a disaster.
I got to leave it there. Elizabeth May and Gary Corbett. Obviously, tough words on a budget we heard last week from Jim Flaherty. We're getting a response rolling out this week. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Very good words by Elizabeth and Truth.
Not surprisingly, a lot of you had...
And with the federal government being able to, when there are overlapping environmental assessments or processes, to step away is very detrimental because, and also because, provinces don't really have the bigger view of the environment in mind. Fish, air, water migrate. Everything migrates. So it should not be, it has to stay in the federal oversight and overview for the greater good, for all of Canada and also all of the planet. Because it is only one planet. The planet doesn't know where the borders are. Anyway, dag video. Peace.